All right, so you have been dealing with the documents for your role of the government in the economy, DBQ. And you're nearing the end. There's just two more left to go over. Document 9 is a quote by a popular politician in the middle of 2000s and even into 2015-16. Ron Paul still has quite a following on the political scene. Now, he made a speech about deficits and how deficits make you poorer back on March 15th of 2005. And in that speech, he said when the federal government spends more each year than it collects in tax revenues, it has three choices. It can raise taxes, print money, or borrow money. While all of those actions may benefit politicians, all three options are bad for average Americans. Deficits mean future tax increases, pure and simple. Deficit spending should be viewed as a tax on future generations, and politicians who create deficits should be exposed as tax hikers. Now, on its surface, it may seem pretty clear what Ron Paul is saying, but we really want to dig in here to make sure we understand why he's so angry about his counterparts, other politicians, using these tactics to lure in Americans and gain their support. So let's take a look at some of the things he said. I'll try to do it in different colors so we can kind of highlight it. But really he lays out pretty clearly that if the government, the federal government, is spending more every year than it takes in from tax revenues, it has to do one of three things. So let's identify those three things. First, he says you can raise taxes. Okay, you can raise taxes. Now, think of the impact that might have on the economy, but also on the chances for re-election for those politicians that push to raise taxes. It might make people angry if they have to raise their taxes. The second thing he says they can do is print money. But money only has value because we know there's a limited amount of it. If the government continues to print more and more and more money, think about what would happen to the value of that money as they continually print more and more and more and make it easy to get. And the last option, he says, is that the government can borrow money. Okay? So 1, they can raise taxes, 2, they can print money, and 3, they can borrow money. Now he says all of these might benefit politicians, right? He mentions right here it may benefit politicians because it's a short-term fix, okay? But all three options are bad for average Americans. That's what he's pushing here. Doesn't matter which one you pick, it's going to be bad for Americans. Because he says deficits, which means spending more than you're making, deficits mean future tax. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to pay them off. But you're going to have to pay it off eventually. So Ron Paul really wants to make it clear that even though current politicians are saying that deficit spending is not a tax, it truly means a higher tax on future generations, which is, of course, you guys. You're the future generations. Okay? And he wants to expose politicians who push for this by saying deficit spending should be viewed as a tax on future generations. And not that we should be informed, but the politicians who create those should be exposed as tax hikers. Okay? So there's a huge impact on just spending more than you make every single year. In fact, we want to kind of think about that when we're breaking down this document. Now, what if your parents spent more money than they earned? Is that always a bad thing? Could it be a good thing? Why or why not? Think about it on the larger scale. Is deficit spending a good thing or a bad thing for governments? Try to think of a way in which deficit spending would be good. And then a way or two in which deficit spending would be harmful. And 3, what are the disadvantages of government spending used to help stimulate the economy? Why don't we do it all the time? Pause the video here, and at the bottom of your note sheet for this document, write your answers to questions 1, 2, and 3. It may help you answer your DBQ when it comes time to write it. All right, now that you've had some time to think about Ron Paul's comments on deficit spending, let's take a look at our 10th and final source for our DBQ. Okay, now in this source you can see that it's a political cartoon, and you can see that the author is posted up here, though it's hard to read the author's name, but they are available, so you'll be able to track that thing back. So we know the source and we know the author. Now we want to go about kind of breaking this thing down and seeing what kinds of information we can find within it. I'm going to shrink it a little bit so we can fit it all on one screen while we're looking at it. Okay, so let's start by doing the same thing we do with every source, especially political cartoons. What do I see? What do I have questions on? So pause it here and take a second just to make note of some of the things you see in this source. All right, so let's take a look. Now there should be some things that are immediately evident to you. Number one is this whole structure, so I'm going to just highlight this entire structure there. This is clearly Mount Rushmore. Okay, Mount Rushmore, which contains the faces of earlier presidents, the founders of the country, those presidents that we say, you know, best represent American ideas and American values. Now, around those faces, you're going to see the words, but we want to figure out, why did the artist put us in front of Mount Rushmore? Because if you think about it, that's a pretty big statement, that he's placing this current situation in front of the founders of the country. So trying to get their idea of, you know, what would be their thinking towards this current crisis. Okay? Now the second thing that we see in here is this gentleman down here, and he's reading a newspaper. Seems to be kind of shocked by it. But it says $790 billion stimulus bill. $790 billion stimulus bill. Okay, and this was in a time when the economy was in a major downturn, in between the Bush administration and the Obama administration, in which the government was desperately trying to release funds into the economy in an effort to stabilize it, in an effort to prevent it from going into a really bad recession. Okay, so we notice that there's that gentleman, and that gentleman, is in front of Mount Rushmore. Okay, and he's reading the paper, and that's important because both Mount Rushmore and the gentleman seem to have the same outlook as to the appropriateness of that stimulus bill. They're both gasping. Okay, typically you gasp in kind of astonishment, in disgust, as like almost a grimace to say it's like a bad thing, unmentionable thing. Okay, so if you put all of that together, what is our artist really suggesting about our founders' views on the stimulus bill? Is it an appropriate thing for the government to be putting that money into the economy, or do the founders view it as something that is not so good? If you're thinking about it and you're still kind of hung up, look at the facial expressions on Mount Rushmore. Yes, even though they're carved in stone, you can see they don't look super happy about it. I mean, look at Teddy Roosevelt, for Pete's sakes. He's actually grimacing in pain. Looks like his mouth is kind of grimacing in pain. So I think that can lead you into understanding the artist's position as to whether or not this was an appropriate use or an inappropriate use of government in that economic situation. Go back through make sure that when you're looking at this cartoon and all your cartoons, you think kind of critically about it. All right, and we covered the interesting details in that, and we talked about some of the symbols that were really recognizable. But your big question here is, are you in agreement? Do you think the cartoonist is correct, that this is inappropriate, or do you disagree and say, no, it is appropriate for the government to take those measures? Because that and the ability to tie that idea into your DBQ are going to be what's important for you today. Go back through, make sure you're comfortable with your sources, and you're ready to write your DBQ coming up.